uh, political parties and the 2003 elections. Quite a hot subject. This year is the election year, and of course we've got plenty of political parties. I recently published a book, Political Parties in Pakistan, Organization and Power Structure. And that means that I've worked rather recently on this particular subject. Out in the field, political parties are now flexing their muscles for the elections. What's going to happen? That will be part of our discussion, but before that, we'll have a look at political parties, the way they operate, the operational dynamics of political parties. That's where we start. So we shall start with focusing on parties, party categories, typologies, and then we'll look at the parties' reflection and reaction on the changing constitutional situation in Pakistan, particularly with reference to the 18th Amendment. And of course, after that, we'll talk about the 2013 election as such. First of all, I'll request my colleague, Dr. Farhan Siddiqui. He'll be talking about the political parties. Further, he'll define for himself whatever he's going to write to talk about and what will be his field of inquiry. So, Dr. Farhan.
Thank you, Dr. Wasim, Dr. Jaffer, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation today concerns the ethno-political parties in Sindh and the 2013 general elections, and what I'll do is that I'll primarily concentrate on the emerging political divide between the Sindhi and Muhajir communities in Sindh. Before moving further on to the dynamics of how ethnopolitics plays out and how the ethnopolitical parties are going about with their pre-electoral strategies in Sindh, for the benefit of the audience, let me just put forth two contentions which inform the overall analysis, which informs my overall analysis into the dynamics of ethnopolitical parties. Number one is that the dynamics of inter-ethnic conflict, they sit side by side with dynamics of inter-ethnic cooperation. So you have, for example, ethnic communities or ethnic groups being viewed as cultural linguistic communities which are inhibited by their culture so that they might not make alliances with ethnic groups which are not based on their cultural linguistic communities. But it's best to view ethnic groups as political actors. So for example, in Sindh now, you have the Sindhi nationalist parties clustering around the PMLN led by Nawaz Sharif, who's actually a Punjabi. Then you have, we speak about a Sindhi Muhajir divide, but if you look at the PPP MQM alliance, it is again primarily a Sindhi Muhajir alliance. So viewed from one angle, there is a Sindhi Muhajir divide. But looking from the other angle, it is again a Sindhi Muhajir alliance in present times, which again alienates some important elements within the Sindhi nationalist community who do not see this alliance as beneficial to them. The other thing which is prevalent within the ethnopolitical discourse and the way ethnopolitics works out in present times is the phenomenon of intra-ethnic conflict. So within the Sindhi ethnic community, you have political parties which have different political aims and objectives. Within the Muhajir community, you have the same. Within the MQM, you have interesting internal divisions which determines their political and electoral strategies as they come up to the year 2013, and I'll speak about them. And of course, one has to take into regard the general political context which informs electoral strategies of these ethno-political groups in recent times. And in the last year or two, especially after the 18th Amendment, it seems that the government mechanisms with respect to ethnic groups is largely conciliatory rather than being standing in opposition, especially with regards to this phenomena of having new provinces in Pakistan. About the ethno-political actors, there are a number of them which proliferate in recent times in Sindh. You have, of course, the MQM, you have the GS Sindh Qaumi Mahaz, you have the Sindh Tarakki Pasand Party led by Qadir Maksi, You have the Awami Tahreek of Rasool Baksh and Ayaz Latif Palijo. You have the Sindh United Party. You have the PMLF Functional, and of course you have the People's Party, which of course takes Sindhi nationalism into focus while going along with its electoral strategies in the province. Of these, and of course the National People's Party as well, of Ghulam Murtaza Jatoi. Now of these parties, as we know, the GS Sindh Qaumi Mahaz, which is a successor group of the GS Sindh Mahaz, is openly secessionist, advocates the idea of a Sindhu Desh, and does not participate in electoral politics. The Awami Tahreek, the other parties, again, they are known for their electoral non-performance. So the irony with respect to Sindhi nationalist politics is that the groups or the parties which make into parliament are the parties which do not represent the radical side of Sindhi nationalism. So Awami Tahreek, which is more radical, is not represented within the provincial or the National Assembly. And the parties, the Sindhi parties, which are predominant in the Sindh Provincial Assembly, for example, the Muslim League Functional, the Sindh United Party, all these are parties which are known for their close ties to the military establishment. They're not actually Sindhi nationalist parties. So the interesting element taking place now in Sindh is that all these groups, the SUP, the Qaumi Mahaz, the Awami Tahreek, the Sindh United Party, again, they're all clustering around onto a single platform and citing their grievances with the MQM-PPP coalition in Sindh as the driving force behind their electoral politics. Most of these parties, the Sindhi nationalist parties, again, are accommodationist, of course, except for the JSQM, which openly advocates secession. So they're happy working within the framework of the Pakistani state. They're calling for decentralization, they're calling for provincial autonomy, they participate in electoral politics, so they do not necessarily see as detrimental to the larger cause, to the larger, so to speak, electoral politics that works within the country. The MQM, of course, has changed in interesting ways since the 1990s. It is no longer the Muhajir Qaumi movement, it is now the Muttahida Qaumi movement, and its political ideology and slogans again work around the idea that it is a party of all the communities that are present in Pakistan, and its slogans have now moved away from that of a pristine Muhajir a slogan to a more Muttahida or a united slogan. But then again, what we see with respect to the MQM in recent times, that with the reinduction of Amir Khan, there has been a return, so to speak, to this idea, this pristine idea of a Muhajir slogan becoming more important. And this was evident last year when you had a proxy, a Muhajir proxy organization calling itself the Muhajir Suba Tehreek, coming out into the open and advocating that they need a separate province for the Muhajirs. And the interesting element in this call for a Muhajir province, separate Muhajir province, was the divide of the division of Sindh along a north and south axis, with the south representing Karachi, Hyderabad and Mirpur Khas being the basis of a Muhajir province, and the north being dominated by the Sindhis. Again, it is interesting to note that the idea of having a separate province is not actually what the MQM advocates. Meaning as early as 1978 when the APMSO was formed, this is when the first time when Azim Ahmad Tariq actually wrote a pamphlet and said that a separate province should be established. But MQM has not been in agreement with the idea of having a separate province for Muhajirs. The party which has actually advocated, the Muhajir party which has actually advocated a separate province for the Muhajirs is the Muhajir Ittihad Tehreek, again known for its electoral non-performance, but a party which is still there, led by Dr. Salim Haider, and he wrote this book in 1987 which was called as Ab Sindh Taqseem Hona Chahiye. And last year, when again this movement for a separate province came out, Salim Haider came out into the open after many years and had a press conference and said that the Muhajirs are actually a repressed group, and this is where the slogans of a separate Muhajir province reverberates, meaning they present themselves as being repressed, as being alienated, as being deprived. And in this very important press conference, again, Dr. Salim Haider called upon the fact that the administrative and the bureaucratic structure of the Sindh province is actually dominated by the Sindhis, and that we need a separate province which would actually be a Muhajir province. But as things stand, the major beneficiaries of the Sindhi Muhajir alliance, that is the MQM PPP alliance, especially if one views the local government ordinance into place, the MQM have been beneficiaries rather than being victims of what the recent political happenings in Sindh have taken place. And of course, the edge that the MQM has over the Sindhi nationalist parties is its overall domination of the Muhajir vote bank. So it takes up a number of important seats, the majority of seats actually, from Karachi and Hyderabad. It has 25 seats in the National Assembly, it has 51 seats in the Provincial Assembly, and that gives it an added advantage over the Sindhi nationalist groups, which again are more splintered and more clustered into different political parties. Coming on finally to the election trends 2013, again interesting phenomena being represented here. The most interesting being of course the entry of the PMLN into Sindhi nationalist politics, and it serves the purpose of both the PMLN and the Sindhi nationalist parties. For the PMLN, of course, the reason why it is entering into Sindh is because it wants to outbid its rival, which is the Pakistan People's Party. For the Sindhi nationalist parties, again, I think they believe in the fact that they cannot do it all alone, that they cannot win seats within the Provincial Assembly in Sindh or maybe in the National Assembly seats. So the best bet for them is to align themselves with a big party such as the PMLN. So in any post-election scenario, if the PMLN forms a government at the center, that is one of their best bets that they can have to go around with their ethnopolitics in Sindh. But again, the Sindhi nationalist groups are primarily marginalized. The PMLN has made some important alliances with some important, again, groups within Sindh, for example, the Jatois, the Unnars, the Shirazis, and the Maksis. And very recently, actually this week, the Sindhi nationalist parties, they all came along to a single platform, a conglomeration of 10 political parties, which is interesting because it also includes the Pakistan Sunni Tehreek, it also includes the Jamaat Islami, it also includes the Jamiyat Ulama Islam Fazlur Rahman group, and here maybe one could think about an important actor, that is the military establishment, which plays an important role in determining electoral outcomes within this country. So again, a large conglomerate alliance of like-minded, so to speak, political parties representing feudal landlords, nationalist, religious and sectarian elements, all combined together against it's an anti-PPP alliance. And again, this would be interesting to see how this alliance works out in the coming elections and how it taps into the anti-PPP sentiment, which is now, it seems, well entrenched in Sindh. The People's Party again is doing the best that it can, meaning the Shirazis of Thatta, very influential group, had an alliance with the PMLN, but the People's Party was able to break it off, and now the Shirazis sit comfortably with the Pakistan People's Party, and now they're no more with the PMLN. So the couple more months to go before we see some interesting electoral alliances, and shifting from one place to another. So how will the elections pan out? I think with the kind of electoral system that we have in place, a first past the post, winner-take-all system, I think the MQM and the PPP would still primarily return to power in the Sindh Provincial Assembly. The nationalist parties, of course, have a certain sense of optimism in recent times, because in the recent by-elections that were held, for example, in Naushera-Feroz, then all nationalist parties combined together, and though they were beaten by the People's Party candidate, but they still managed to win around 23,000 votes. So the best they can do for now is at least spring some major surprises in the coming elections, and though they might move into some areas where the People's Party is in dominance, but at least in Karachi, in Hyderabad, and in other traditional strongholds of the Pakistan People's Party, it seems that these parties will most probably return to power within the Sindh Assembly, and there might be certain surprise packages of how this grand alliance of nationalists, religious and other parties pans out. Thank you very much.
Great. This art of finishing in time, that's envy for others. May I now request Dr. Syed Jafar Ahmed to say a bit about his area of expertise, which is, of course, in this case, 18th Amendment and political parties.
Thank you, Dr. Saab, ladies and gentlemen. My talk will center around this publication, Political Parties in Pakistan, Organization and Power Structure, written by Dr. Wasim and Maryam Mufti. Though this book is about the political parties organization, I have tried to extract some federal sort of perspective from this book. And in order to understand what different political parties have in terms of commitment towards federalism, provincial autonomy, etc. To begin with, I would say that we all know that there is a strong rationale for federalism in Pakistan, being a multicultural, multi-ethnic and multilinguistic society. Pakistani society can very easily be described as a federal society. And in such a society with such diverse segments, cultural segments, the best political system is supposed to be a federal system in which we have a general government and regional governments. And the general and regional governments have their well-defined respective areas of competence, which is ensured by the constitution of the country. Our constitution has also done that, and in the 1973 constitution we had two separate lists, a federal list and a concurrent list. Now after the 18th amendment, the concurrent list has been abolished and we have one federal list and the rest of the subjects have gone to the provinces. In any federal system, the intergovernmental relations play a very important role. How the respective governments at the center and in the provinces operate within constitutional domain and how they interact with each other, on that depends the success of a federal arrangement. Now, the intergovernmental relations can also be seen in two areas. What are the determinants of the constitution? For example, in Pakistan's constitution, there are certain institutions like Council of Common Interest, then we have NFC, we have National Economic Council. These are the institutions where the central and the regional governments converge, they sit together, they negotiate, and they sort out the federal issues. And if there is any problem, that goes to the Council of Common Interest, and after the 18th Amendment, the Council of Common Interest has become very important. So this is a constitutional arrangement which has been provided by our constitution, and in all federal constitutions they have such institutions which ensure good intergovernmental relations. But apart from that, a lot of federal working depends on the political parties. What is the character of political parties, how they respond to the federal principle, how have they organized themselves. This is also very important. And then how the governments are made. For example, if there is a government run by one particular organization, that may lead to centralization, like that happened in India. In the first 2.5 decades, Congress party was in rule, and we saw that in those years, though Congress had been successful in uniting India and carrying through its economic policies, but many constitutional requirement of federalism were bypassed. For example, inter-provincial and intergovernmental institutions did not operate in many a case, because the state governments were also run by the Congress government, and the central government was there. So whenever Congress party had its own meeting, the state chief ministers and the prime minister got to sit together and sort out their issues, and the constitutional body was never called upon. So that is one model. Then there is another model of coalition governments, where the regional governments also get some share in the central power. And in that case, it is found that the coalition governments do good to federalism. And in the case of India, again, we see that that has been helpful. In the case of Pakistan also, despite all the criticism we see in the media, in the last 5 years, we have seen that the Awami National Party and MQM, being part of the coalition government in the center, was helpful in ensuring the stability of this government and enabling it to complete its 5-year term. But in case of a regional party running one province and not having a share in the center, that may lead to tension in intergovernment relations. Now, a few words about the 18th Amendment. I would say that 18th Amendment had been a very important milestone in our constitutional history. I would say that it was a great departure from the colonial model of 1919 Montego-Chelmsford reforms and the 1935 Act. Perhaps I would be justified in saying that this is the first step towards decolonization in Pakistan in constitutional terms. But again, there are certain things which should be brought into in discussion. First is the issue of the capacity of the provinces. Were provinces prepared for the, carrying this 18th Amendment? I think that the answer would be that the capacity differs in different provinces. Punjab was quite prepared to accept this, and they have started working on this 18th Amendment. Sindh has been slow. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa was very quick in implementing the 18th Amendment, but the slowest province has been Balochistan. So the issue of capacities is still there. I think that the period of transition was too small. It should have been more than 1 year because it required a lot of engineering. We were dissolving 17 federal ministries, and we should have prepared the provinces to accommodate the personnel, to accept all those challenges which would come. So, I mean, the capacity issue was there. But more important than that was the issue of social ownership of 18th Amendment, where I think that our political parties failed to a large extent. They have been successful in adopting the 18th Amendment. The 27-member committee which made this amendment was quite quick. There was quite forthright. The parliament was very quick in adopting it. But we see that the political party's own commitment was not that strong. The first voice against the 18th Amendment came from the ministers of People's Party. Sardar Asif Ahmad Ali was the first to speak against the devolution of the Ministry of Education. Then came the resentment of the Health Ministry. So we see that there is a lack of commitment on the part of political leaders and the political parties. And as I mentioned, that they could not create social ownership for this, which has now, I think, threatened the fate of 18th Amendment. And I wonder if after elections of 2013, different political formation may have a different attitude towards it. And I doubt that it would continue in its entirety. Already 7 federal ministries have been created in the center in order to accommodate the Muslim League Q ministers. And there is likelihood that 1 or 2 ministries would fully go to the center after the 2013 2013 elections if a very different political formation comes into office. So these are some of the observations which while reading this book I thought should be brought to the fore and put to a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaffer. The third speaker of this panel is myself. I initiated this panel mainly, as I mentioned, because political parties are going to be the main actors in the tamasha which is going to be unfolded very soon. There is other things remaining the same, because in Pakistan prediction is rather an awesome exercise. So, ladies and gentlemen, my take on political parties is that they have to be understood basically and very comprehensively in terms of their operational dynamics. So I'll be talking about three things. First, the inner dynamics of political parties. In fact, that was the inquiry which underlay my book, which came out very recently. Second, what kind of elections are going to be? There is a bounded space for political parties. That's the title of my presentation in a forthcoming conference, Political Parties in a Bounded Space, the 2013 elections. And thirdly, of course, I'll be talking and interpreting and a bit forecasting about the results and the mode of action and the ideological expressions of the 2013 elections as they can be interpreted at this very moment. So first of all, the inner dynamics of the political parties. Here, as we know, first of all, there is in the country a two-party dominance model. For years, particularly in the first generation after independence, there was one-party dominance model which operated. After Bangladesh, we again had one-party dominance model, but this time it was not the Muslim League, but rather People's Party. People's Party soon atrophied in some ways, particularly because of Ziaul Haq's martial law. From 1986, the other party, the rejuvenated Muslim League, came to power, and from 88 onwards, we've got now a two-party dominance model. That is the framework in which this particular inquiry took place. The smaller parties tend to uphold identity. This is, in my view, the basic difference. The mainstream parties try to go beyond identity because they have to spread their wings all around across the boundaries of the ethnic communities, religious communities, sectarian communities, provinces, and therefore they do not uphold identity to that extent as do the smaller parties, and they are of two kinds. First, the ideological parties revolving around religion. Second, the ideological parties revolving around ethnicity. These are the two identity-based models, let's say, for smaller parties. In all these parties, the leadership dominates, and there is quite a bit of criticism about dynastic politics. My research and the research of others in this field brings out the fact that there is a party identification model that operates. Party identification model of Labour Party, of Conservative Party somewhere, other than Pakistan, goes by policy. There is an absolute absence of policy from the political parties. Instead of policy, it's the leader who provides the identification for political parties. Therefore, it's Nawaz Party, it's Altaf Party, it's Zardari Party, it's Asfandiar Party, and so on. Leader is the alibi for policy. It's not for nothing that in the third world countries, particularly in the region where we live, South Asia, this particular model operates. The parties from the right have been moving towards the center, the parties from the left have been moving towards the center, and there is a kind of a blurring of identity. Ethnic parties have more or less shed their separatist agenda. Of course, there are some nationalist parties in Balochistan struggling for independence. Islamic parties moved from the pressure politics of the first generation to electoral politics in 1970s to regional networking in the Gulf, particularly Saudi Arabia, and in Afghanistan in the 1980s and 90s. And after 9/11, now we've got the militant Islamic parties which have largely, if not totally, replaced the parliamentary Islamic parties in terms of influence. Now the ultimate Islamic agenda is in the hands of those outside the parliament rather than inside, and those inside continue to draw their inspiration from outside. And if we've got this particular framework, then obviously there is some food for thought here. The multiple parties all around, and there are hundreds, number one, and even those registered with the election commission, there are quite a few. What happens is that in a multiple context, the victors, those who won and got into the parliament, they are not representatives, whereas they are representatives, but their representative potential is low. For example, the whole National Assembly would have behind it maybe 20, maybe 30 probably % of the polled vote, which means that there is a problem with the system. We've got first past the post system, of course, which operates, but we can talk about it. The coalition which is ruling the country typically is based not on policy, not on ideology, not on meeting of minds, but on patronage, access to the resources of the state. That puts together PPP and PMLQ and MQM and erstwhile UEF, and of course PMLF as well. So what is this? If there is no direction, no policy which underlines the coalition, then there is something of a problem. Now the elections are going to take place, and here we've got the bounded space, and the concept of the bounded space usually is that you can go this far. For example, in the definition which is commonly accepted of democracy, the ultimate decision-making authority lies in the hands of the elected representatives. Obviously not so in Pakistan. Here the ultimate decision-making authority lies outside the parliament, and therefore outside the executive, which is based on the parliament, and therefore elections touch and go that particular edifice of authority which is the establishment. So here it is that it does happen that the military starts operation in Swat, And 2 days later, Prime Minister of Pakistan, Gilani, announces that now I have decided and I have asked the army to carry out a military operation in Swat 2 days after the operation had already started, meaning thereby that there is an absolute gap of authority in terms of exercise of the supreme power in the realm of decision making. So we have to take into account the bounded space, not only in terms of the output, which is in the form of legislation or decision making, but also in terms of input, not only the output but also the input. The input relates to the legitimate exercise of polling. Before polling, a lot happens, and we know that the influence peddling which goes on behind the scenes is rampant. You can float a new party, and we have seen that. You can float a new leader straight away. The establishment can start, for example, a new coalition like Defense of Pakistan. Start an ideology, put something into the exercise about the discourse, bring in a new leader, try to divide. What is going on? What is this bounded space? How to define it? And there I would say that we have to look at the restrictions and restraints on the campaign. First, the security. We all know that Taliban are hovering around, and they don't like this particular exercise because this is un-Islamic or supra-Islamic. This is a Western secular state. Elections are not Islamic, and of course all the paraphernalia. So we all know about that. They can kill. Therefore, they have the threat of Taliban has changed and is going to change the election campaign because of the lack of security for the candidates. Now the public meetings are not going to be so many out there, particularly for the larger parties. And if they are going to be, they'll be held with the understanding of the militant elements. This is what partially explains what happened last week in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where they tried to deal with the invitation of the Taliban to negotiations, meaning thereby that political parties are looking around for an opportunity to buy security from those who can challenge the security. And of course, there are Articles 62, 63. They are there. They can be used anytime, either by the Election Commission or by the judiciary or by whosoever, the habitual petitioners who are all around. So there is this particular limited space which is getting more and more so in the coming days, and there are new proxies coming up, either ideologies or leaders or coalitions. So-called alliances are being floated into the field. So having pointed out these awesome moments and these strange guys and these behind the screen moves, we can of course talk about those who are out there, and they have been talked about in terms of clash of institutions, judiciary versus the executive. This has been the scene in the last 4 years, army and the executive, the last 4 years and the last 40 years or 60 years, and of course Islamic parties which are changing their color, because now they openly decry and condemn parliamentary politics because they've got power in their hands of some kind and they impose their decisions. Now what's happening? This is the last part of my presentation. What's going to happen? What is the quest for as far as the establishment is concerned? It's very difficult to talk about the establishment in Pakistan. By establishment in Pakistan is meant indirectly, informally, the military establishment. But there are two more establishments here. One, the establishment we inherited from British India, the institutional constitutional mechanism ruling Pakistan. Thousands of laws, acts enacted during the last 100 years or so, they are part and parcel of the legal machinery of Pakistan. Bureaucracy, army, judiciary, and most other institutions, they are operating according to that particular establishment, which has been getting weaker by the day. The military establishment has been getting space more and more at every step. The third, amorphous establishment, not a hierarchically established, not an institutionally formed establishment, but an amorphous establishment, is the Islamic establishment, which operates by denying things which could otherwise happen. There are these types of establishments which are operating, and they tend to limit the dynamics of political parties. And that is how there is a search for an actor, a choice, an alternative beyond the two major parties. Therefore, the coming election is about initiating some kind of a process where the third option, the third alternative can be brought in. This is how I look at the election, this Qadri phenomenon, and before that some new leaders who have come up. The quest for alternative, Islamic alternative, that means an ideological alternative. Leadership alternative, of course we've seen that. Imran came up, for example, a year ago. Or trying to derail the process, of course Qadri's example is there. So all this means that there are forces which are trying to establish their writ at the expense of the other two establishments, or maybe two establishments have joined hands against the third, the most institutionally operative establishment and legally operative establishment, which is the state of Pakistan. So here the issue of governance, of course, we'll talk about. People are sick of the two parties, mainly in terms of governance, and if it is so, where does this particular issue or this particular framework fit in the overall political dynamics of Pakistan? So here are political parties, here is the election going to be, and there is quite a bit of uncertainty about both the process and the outcome. Thank you very much. The floor is open, and we'll welcome the questions about the three presentations which you have heard. Yes.
Hello, I have question to all the three speakers. The major problem and basic problem with the creation of Pakistan after is the fight between democratic, liberal and tolerant forces against the anti-democratic, dictatorial and non-tolerant terrorist forces. This problem, and always non-democratic forces have come into power since the except this period of 4 years when something continuity of democracy is being established. What do you think that these elections will result whether into the whether the democratic forces will come into power or anti-democratic force will come into power, because a great hype has been created in the name of poor governance and corruption against the democracy. Even this, the first time in the history of Pakistan, our judiciary seems to be practically with the anti-democratic forces. Most conservative judges, by the will of one person, has been inducted in this. What do you think this elections will give us on some positive democratic forces or anti-democracy in power?
Yeah. Doctor?
Okay, thank you for this question. I mean, you have asked about future, and one thing which is said about professors like me is that they shouldn't profess. So I don't know what will happen in future, but I tend to think that if the legal, constitutional, political process is allowed to continue, and the apprehensions that have been mentioned by Dr. Wasim, if they are sort of neutralized, then the political process would continue. I'm quite hopeful that a good framework is also available there. We have hopes with the Election Commission, which is a different commission now this time round. So if the threats which have been referred to, if they are met and if they are neutralized, I think the political process would continue.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम फरहान साहब, my question is to you. You spoke on the nationalist parties of Sindh, but recently we saw them, though they were in favor of the welfare of the majority Sindhi population, still they went out and met the Mahajir Qawmi movement Hakiki chairperson Afaq Saab. Whenever such a meeting takes place, we as journalists think it to be a stand against the strongest party in terms of the seats they cover, the Muttahida Qawmi movement of Karachi. Do you think such meetings are there to weaken the Muttahida, but it actually is strengthening the party for the coming elections? If I made myself clear.
Which party is it strengthening in the coming years?
The nationalist parties are joining hands with Hakiki, which is by virtue of its name a Mahajir party. But it seems that they are only joining hands to take a stand against the MQM, the Muttahida Qawmi movement. They think such a meeting is there to strengthen the Muttahida in the longer term.
Well, you see, this is what I said in the initial part of the presentation, that you take ethnic groups as political actors. So at one point in time, you have nationalist parties in Sindhi nationalist parties not happy with the MQM, which is primarily Muhajir dominated. But then they're happy to forge an alliance with the Muhajir Qawmi movement, which is again Muhajir dominated. What is happening, as we've seen last year as well, with the Mohabbat-e-Sindh rally, for example, where the Awami Tehreek and the ANP and other forces joined together, because after the invocation of a separate Mahajir province. So I think it's more in terms of electoral politics, that whether they can form a common strategy in the coming elections, because the Hakiki was able to win one seat in the provincial assembly elections in Sindh in 2002. So in that sense, it's more part of an electoral strategy so that they can bring all these actors together against an anti-PP and anti-MQM vote bank. Which, yeah.
Dr. Saab, you mentioned that there are institutions and then there is a kind of a tussle for space between the institutions. That is, the judiciary, the army and the political parties which are part of our democratic struggle. Now, in the last many years, the growth of political parties was retarded because of frequent military intervention and long, intimidation or suppression of political parties. In that context, the political parties all of them are quasi-feudal parties. And these institutions have developed continuously as a developed capitalist economy institutions. Is the competition fair among them? Because do you think that the quasi-feudal parties can upset these developed institutions and get more power, which is the legitimate power for them?
There is a contest at two levels. First of all, the establishment, which is the military establishment, and the political parties. In that competition, the political parties tend to duck in, and the others, that means the establishment people, tend to prevail. On the other hand, within the political arena, it's the political parties, they do manage to keep the momentum, even though the establishment continues to penetrate the formal political field of political competition. There, I don't think that the direct nominees of the establishment have been able to threaten the major political parties, at least not till now. So we can't confuse the two areas of competition. We all know that political forces are weaker than the establishment, but once the electoral dynamics is allowed to move in, then of course establishment tends to lose the initiative after the announcement of the election. Yes, Sunil, here there was somebody, and then so number one here and number two there. Okay? No, not here, not here. There where you were. Yes, there, yeah. And after that, then you go there, please.
Yeah, I thought the third speaker in the center was very insightful, and you brought up a point about establishment, that we do not know who the establishment is. And then there seems to be, from the discussion, that there seems to be a problem of assimilation in this country. No, the center. The
Yeah,
one.
okay. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
thought you was very insightful. You talked about establishment, that we do not know who it is, but we somewhat know who it is. And then there's a problem of assimilation in this country, where there are smaller political parties that are on the basis of ethnic groups, and there is a failure to form a large political party that is almost a national or a national representative in all major provinces and minor provinces. And there seems to be that the smaller parties seem to be headed towards what we've already had with the partition in India on the basis of religion, and now then there was an East Pakistan and West Pakistan thing that has already happened. And the smaller political party the discussion seems to move somehow towards a separate province rather than forming a national political party. Do you think that this unknown establishment has something to do with this, that every time they try to form a national political party, the major political party everybody attacks, and then instead of forming a larger political party, everybody starts talking about a separate province?
There is the old method of striking a blow on the major political parties to keep them in line and not to let them outgrow the influence of the establishment. This is a standing policy. Within this, within this framework, political parties have been trying to exert. So 1973 Constitution was one major part of that particular struggle, where 4 provinces were given full-fledged recognition of their separate ethnic identities, which was a major move forward. What has happened is, in the first decade of the 21st century, which resulted, of course, in the 18th Amendment, that is that the 18th Amendment has given further recognition and therefore further power and further influence to the majority communities of the 4 provinces. and it has straightaway led to alienation of the minorities within the minorities. So the three smaller provinces, the minority provinces, their minorities, the Pashto speaking in Balochistan and the Mohajir speaking in Sindh, and of course the Hindko speaking in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, all three of them have been alienated, and they have been knocking at the doors of the state to create new provinces for them. Suddenly there is this particular demand coming up. So while this is going on, the others, they tried to contain what is called the majority constraining federalism in Pakistan, which is based on Punjab. How to bring Punjab to its senses, which means cut it to size. That is where Saraiki comes in. So Saraiki has found its the protagonists from outside Saraiki speaking area. MQM here, and of course People's Party in Punjab and wherever. So what I'm saying is that this new controversy, this is the new part of the controversy. But what I'm saying is that the overall situation is such that minorities within minorities are now demanding the new provinces, or if it is not possible, like it is not possible, for example, here where there was a Sindhi backlash, there then the second alternative is devolution, local government. So the MQM's stand is that we want local government, a strengthened, meaningful local government within the framework of Sindh. That means if Sindh is not going to be divided. So various platforms are used for various demands which are coming up. But I think this answers part of the question, but let's move on. Ji, Dr.
Ji, this is in response to Wasim Saab's point. I like your idea of bounded space, of how political parties can work in Pakistan, and how you said that political parties are, the leadership is an alibi for the political party. I think this is Asfandiar's party, that is so-and-so's party. However, I think that we've whipped the establishment horse for too long. And I think you do that as well. I think you overemphasize the predominant role of what we call the establishment, let's say the military or the Taliban or others. And I think you do not emphasize enough the changes that have taken place over the last couple of years. With the military on the retreat in terms of its interference, it has an influence, maybe not as much interference power as it used to have 5 years ago. Also, after this Tahir al-Qadri episode, I think what we've also seen is that there has been a demand, a continuous demand for further democratization in Pakistan. There's a further need for demand over the media, over the public, that elections have to be held. So I think that maybe we've turned a little bit beyond your model, which to me seems to be about 2 years outdated. And maybe I'm being overly optimistic. We never know that tomorrow morning Kayani might be on the headlines for the wrong reasons. And that has happened in Pakistan. We've been taken by surprise. So my comment is basically, I think that now there is a vested interest in democratization in Pakistan, which goes beyond the establishment. And political parties, individuals, the mass media, the Human Rights Commission, and there is a growing awareness. I think we are now finally thinking about a political democratization. Thank you.
What I understand is that there is quite a bit of demand from various sections of the population for democracy, and therefore all eggs are not in the basket of the establishment. This is probably the observation. And here I would say the lovers of democracy, of course, are stronger and are more in number. And media is the new entrant into the field, and it will give tough time to any military adventurers in future. On the other hand, the establishment and its constituency, which is the middle class, the urban middle class and the majority of the urban middle class, not in the sense as it is understood here probably in Karachi, but in the upcountry and overall the countrywide middle class, the salaried, professional, commercial, middle class sections, they are sick of the political leadership, political parties. They are waiting for that third alternative, the so-called way out. And they have been a steady constituency of the army for the last 66 years, and they are the ones who like to go beyond the current bipolar framework of politics in Pakistan. On the one hand, I agree, yes, democratic elements have been operating and therefore they are strong. But unfortunately, we must not forget the strength of the others, because judiciary has come up and judiciary is in some way in step with the extra parliamentary logic. And let's not be misled by one verdict in one case while there are other verdicts in other cases. Chaudhary has been referring to Articles 61, 62, which were brought in by the martial law dictator, and so on. There is a certain type of game which is in place, and there the space for political parties is bounded, unfortunately, even though quite a bit of momentum has been gained by the political parties.